friends, my name is Marines, and today I have a review for you of Fallen Kingdoms and Rebel Spring, the first two books in the Fallen Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes. I'm saying this is a review for the first two books because all of the opinions that I have on the book that I most recently read, Rebel Spring, hold true for Fallen Kingdoms. All of the examples that I will be using in this review, however, come from Rebel Spring. Fallen Kingdoms is the story of three separate kingdoms on the same continent, and essentially the grapple for power between them. We follow 4 points of view, including two princesses, a prince, and a young man who gets involved in this whole overthrow of power and tangle for power after his brother is murdered. There is also an element of magic involved, as there is a long history of elemental magic in these kingdoms, although it has been long dormant. There is a prophecy that says that one girl will come forward and she will have the ability to master all of the elements. I read Fallen Kingdoms last October and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I buddy read Rebel Spring this month in January, and I am between 2.5 and 3 stars for this book. When I compare Rebel Spring to other 2-star rated books that I have in the same genre and category, like Red Queen and Throne of Glass, I think it is a cut above. But while I was reading, there are just a lot of things that got on my nerves about this book. The style of writing in these books is always okay at first, but the more I read of it and the more time I spend with it, the more that it grates. My complaints aren't necessarily about any deficiencies, so these are things that are about my own personal preferences. Rhodes tells and doesn't show. She spells out every action and element of her story and her world. She repeats things over and over again, and this is especially true in Rebel Spring, where it felt like she was recapping the whole first book through the entire second book. She exposits a lot, and her story is also full of the narrative question because it's like she doesn't trust the reader enough to understand the developments of her plot and what they mean for the story. She uses these questions to handhold the reader to make sure that we are picking up the significance of everything that is developing. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I've complained about the narrative question before, specifically when I was talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses and Goosebumps books. Only one of those series is written for children. To give an example of what I mean, I picked one of the magical elements of the series, and that is the Watchers. These are immortal beings that are trapped in their own dimension since the loss of elemental magic within the kingdoms. Some of them can take on the form of hawks, and in that way can watch the actions of humans of particular interest. Most people within the story believe that Watchers are a myth, but we, the reader, know that they are real because we see them throughout the story. I searched the story with my Kindle for the word Watcher and came up with 66 mentions. Check this out. Page 16. Even the Watchers are interested. Such ridiculous thoughts he'd hold on to rather than share with Brian. The stories of immortals who entered the mortal realm in the form of hawks were just that. Stories told to children before bedtime. On page 44, Watchers are mentioned again, and Magnus tells us that he didn't believe in them until recently. Page 48. My name is Alexius. I am one of those known to mortals as Watchers. I've watched over you since you were an infant. 2 lines later. I don't believe in such stories. They're not stories, he frowned. Later on the same page, we're told Lucia managed to get her hands on forbidden children's storybooks, in which she learned the legends of Watchers and the Sanctuary. She read the stories about their ability to enter the dreams of mortals, but that was all they were, only stories. Page 49. If he really was a Watcher, an immortal being who lived in a world apart from that of mortals, why would he need the help of a 16-year-old girl? Page 50. Lucia calls Watchers only legends again. Page 54. There are 2 mentions of immortal Watchers. Page 117. Beautiful immortal Watcher. Page 143. His entire life he denied the existence of such a thing as magic, but Lucia had proved to him that it was true. It was real. Elementia, according to the books that she'd recently read in the Iranian palace, tied back to immortal Watchers. And Watchers, so legend told, could sometimes visit mortals in their dreams. After this, we start talking about exiled Watchers. Witches were said to be descendants of exiled Watchers. When these immortals entered the mortal world, they too became immortal. Page 217. Perhaps he was being paranoid, especially since he didn't believe in legends. But still, if she was a Watcher, then Jonas hoped she would approve of the plan. Page 224. Perhaps she'd shared too much, but with Alexius she felt comfortable, which was surprising considering who and what he was, an immortal Watcher, 2,000 years old. And I could go on and on through nearly every one of these 66 mentions. They're almost always attached to some expository phrase, and there's no reason that on page 100 we have a parenthetical phrase explaining what a Watcher is takeaways when we've already experienced a book and a half. And this doesn't only happen with Watchers. I chose Watchers as an example, but it happens with Elementia, with different characters, specifically King Gaius, who we're always told is the king of blood, blood this. Anytime Gaius is mentioned, blood is like hand in hand with that mention as well. Even with the different kingdoms, whenever they're mentioned, there's usually some mention of how one is rich, one is poor, and one is cold. It really pads out the story, and it made it difficult for me to read at points, probably because it's difficult to read when you're constantly rolling your eyes. There were a lot of things here present as well that were typical YA fantasy tropes. They bothered me though, not because they were tropes, but because of the repetition. There were a lot of duplicitous situations in the story and a lot of characters who are torn in two different directions. Okay, cool, fine, right? Not cool, because we get descriptions of emotions flashing across their faces and flashing through their eyes and smiles that are not quite genuine every other page. Eyes get mentioned 250 times in this story, and they are always expressing these really complicated emotions because eyes have faces of their own in YA. I want to be clear here that I'm sure that other stories mention eyes and smiles plenty of times, probably even books that I've liked in the past. I think it all goes back to the entire package of the author's style and grace. When I was in musical theater in school, we had this very enthusiastic teacher who told us that if anybody ever came up to us after a performance and told us that we were great in the role, that it would be kind of like an insult. Our goal was not to be seen as an actor playing a part, but to get lost in the part. I think we saw pieces of this with Alan Rickman, who recently passed away, and the way people so vividly remember for the parts that he played, specifically with Professor Snape. The point is that you don't want to see the strings in fiction. It's not that there isn't a set, but that the set should not draw the eye away from what's happening on the stage. You don't want to feel the weight of sentences in a book or have some clunky phrasing or a misplaced word draw your attention away from the actual plot or characters. It's not that you can't describe the eyes or a smile, but when it becomes so much that you are noticing that instead of paying attention to the plot and characters, then it becomes a problem, and that's what happened to me in this book. In that same vein, I found the burgeoning romances to be a little bit eye-rolly as well. It felt like to me that two characters couldn't encounter each other without some sexually tension-filled glance passing between the two of them. There is one particular scene where Jonas is mortally wounded and Lysandra finds him and takes a moment to notice his cinnamon brown eyes and dark thick lashes, and it's through this interaction that we realize that she might be developing feelings for Jonas as he's gushing blood. I think this also ties to my complaints about the writing, but I did not understand the character motivations at all. This was my main takeaway from Fallen Kingdom, and it really persists into Rebel Spring. In Fallen Kingdoms, we're introduced to all of the kingdoms and the political intrigue, but most of that is being directed by the kings in charge and not directly by our four main characters. That being said, it just astounded me how small the worldview of the four main characters actually was. All of them seemed to react with this bloodlust and violence lust that just did not seem justified because of the actions of those around them. They were too quick to jump into this idea of like killing everybody else and coming out on top. It might have been played like that was the way that they were raised and all of that stuff, but it didn't come across in the text that way to me personally. It just came across as confusing, and again, I just did not buy any of the motivations. Jonas gets involved in this whole plot to overthrow the government because his brother is killed, but the leap from wanting revenge to overthrowing government is a big one for me, and he's the most understandable character. Lucia is a dunce. There was a moment in Rebel Spring that I wanted to just chuck my Kindle because she is thinking about her father and about how he kills everyone and is mean to everyone, but he's never been mean to her. So what is that worldview? Especially because he used her as a pawn in this whole world, and that didn't work out very well for her. But she's got this whole paragraph where she's like, I don't know, he's always been pretty nice to me. Everyone comes up with the worst plan and it never goes right. This makes the plot seem like it's moving faster than it actually is, because all of Rebel Spring can be condensed into failed plots and a marriage. I'm frustrated by Jonas and his dumb decision making. I hate Magnus, and I think it's only made worse because Rhodes spells out his motivations. He's supposed to be this morally gray character, but Rhodes doesn't actually leave anything in the gray. She spells out all of his feelings, and he's basically going to ignore his own sense and basic human decency to like be moody and grumbly, and I do not like him at all. Lucia is the most powerful, useless character ever, and Cleo didn't have much to do for suffering suffer and fake smile a lot in this book. I will end on a positive note though and say that this book flew by so quickly because there is almost literally nothing to interpret, and Rhodes really holds your hand through the whole thing. The plot speeds right by. Characters enter through one door and they don't make it through the next door before they are dead. Plans are introduced in one chapter only to fail in the next one, and we move right along. 400 pages felt like nothing, and it would be almost dumb not to continue with the series because there is such an insignificant time commitment to it. Also, while I don't care about the characters, I am curious where Rhodes is going to take them. Like, I don't care if they all die, but I'm curious if that's what Rhodes is going to do about them, if that makes sense. I will need to take some time before moving on to Gathering Darkness, but that is something that I plan to do, especially if I can buddy read it again sometime this year. I'd love to hear your take on the first two books if you have read them. Did you notice any of the same things that I did, or was it just me? Let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. So why did I give it 3 stars after that very rambly explanation of what I didn't like? I felt like when those repetitive elements were especially present, it was very painful, but otherwise, if those things were absent and we were just kind of speeding along with the plot, it was better. And also because I recognize that a lot of it is personal preference. If you are the type of person that likes your stuff cut and dry, this is gonna be great for you because, you know, this is what Rhodes does. To me, it bothered me, though I can say that it wasn't necessarily a deficiency in her writing or in her plotting, like, you know, A Court of Thorns and Roses, where she just cannot write a sentence to save her life. So I mean, overall, not terrible, not my favorite.